Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales feels like the second half to The City That Never Sleeps, the expansion to 2018's Marvel Spider-Man, and unfortunately its gameplay never quite manages to break free of that feeling. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. I like 2018 Spider-Man for its engaging combat loop, so I'm glad Spider-Man Miles Morales emulates it. It's just that sometimes Spider-Man Miles Morales can feel too similar to what's come before, which can get in the way of establishing Miles as his own brand of superhero. Regardless, the familiar trappings of Spider-Man Miles Morales are used to tell an entirely fresh story with a few brand new faces, and it's that narrative and those characters that manage to distinguish Spider-Man Miles Morales as an open-world action game that's compelling to play.
Okay, Pete! Yeah! I got this! Take it away, careful! Whoa, wait! That's the ball!
The main plot of the game sees Miles try to garner the favor of New York by fulfilling requests left by random New Yorkers on a smartphone app, as well as stop the escalating conflict between Roxanne Energy Corporation and a gang called the Underground. The story is your standard superhero affair with betrayals and ramifications that are familiar to the genre, but still exciting to watch unfold. If anything, it's the characters who manage to keep the campaign from feeling formulaic, the Tinkerer especially. The game humanizes a classic but somewhat bland member of Spidey's rogues gallery, and gives them a compelling reason for why they turn to a life of crime, reinventing the character into more of a tragic figure. In a certain light, the Tinkerer's actions could be construed to be almost heroic in an anti-hero sort of way, allowing the character to exist as a dark foil to Miles' Spider-Man. And at the center of that comparison between Miles and the Tinkerer is their shared life experiences.
The man you answer to, Simon Krieger, is a killer. This plaza is a monument to everything he's done. I won't let it open.
Prior to Miles' regular interactions with the Tinkerer, his evolution as a hero is primarily seen through his closest friends and confidants. Miles is surrounded by heroes, so a small but significant part of Spider-Man Miles Morales is his musings about who he should be taking inspiration from. His friends serve as two sides of a coin, playing the roles of angels and devils in the debates that will define Miles. Genki, for example, knows that Miles is Spider-Man and understands what Miles wants to get out of the role, but can't really empathize with Miles' Black or Puerto Rican heritage. Other friends and allies, however, more closely relate to Miles' cultural identities and struggles, but don't understand the extent of his secret identity. Miles regularly talks to key members of the supporting cast throughout the first half of the campaign. You get to see him coming to an understanding of what type of hero he wants to be through these conversations. It's awesome. And so when he dons his traditional black and red suit and emerges as a brand new Spider-Man for the first time, one similar to but also altogether different from Peter Parker Spider-Man, you can understand how he's grown to this point. You got to see it. You got to live through that internal turmoil with him. The child of a black father and Puerto Rican mother, Miles is a wonderful mixture of cultures and languages. The way he leaps off of rooftops and flips backwards to face the camera before falling into a headfirst dive is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen. It gives me goosebumps every time he does it, especially as the music begins to swell. Speaking of, we've got to talk about the music. When Miles begins swinging, the orchestral score grows louder, but there's a nice synthetic hip-hop undercurrent to the whole thing. The music crackles with a soft percussion, it reverberates in your ears with a steady crescendo that stops just short of overtaking the sounds of the city. It allows you to remain clued into New York even while Miles is soaring through the air at breakneck speeds.
Hey, Uncle Aaron, what's up?
Hey, how's your jump shot these days?
Unfortunately, Spider-Man Miles Morales can't slow down enough for you to really immerse yourself in the music that plays in the open world. If Genki isn't calling to direct Miles to his next objective, then it's Miles' mother checking in, or his uncle offering some advice, or J. Jonah Jameson ranting about the new web-swinging menace, or someone else. The game is constantly cutting off the music to deliver a new waypoint for you to follow, or a conversation to listen to before the new waypoint appears. You can turn some of these voices off, but many are tied to the story, so you'll have someone almost always yapping in your ear. This is largely because of Spider-Man Miles Morales' pacing. Miles acquires a series of gadgets and abilities at a fairly steady pace, swinging from one high-key set piece to the next. This works for its frantic introduction, as the sheer whiplash of needing to constantly adapt to different types of gameplay in such a short time puts you right into Miles' headspace. However, because that pacing never really lets up, it can feel like Spider-Man Miles Morales is almost rushing towards its conclusion, desperate to deliver on the promise that Miles ends the game as a seasoned Spider-Man without really slowing down to show you how he manages to earn the respect and appreciation of his city. Speaking of, Spider-Man Miles Morales' New York is largely the same as the one in 2018 Spider-Man. The game does look better on PS5, but it isn't a drastic difference. After extensive testing on PS5, the consensus among GameSpot staff is that the technical features provided by PS5's DualSense controller don't add anything meaningful to the gameplay either, so you're getting a similar experience whether you're playing on PS4 or PS5. Regardless of where you're playing, the city is a lot more stunning while in motion. Taking a break from web swinging or fighting crime to walk on the streets and high-five pedestrians reveals somewhat drab NPC designs and no meaningful way for Miles to interact with his fellow citizens. Given that one of Miles' biggest motivations in the game is to connect with the people of his city, it's disappointing that there's no way to do so outside of the new app request side missions. Between chapters, Miles typically muses aloud that he should take a moment to respond to requests for help on his app, and it's in these bite-sized stories that you get to see Miles interacting with his community, albeit with shallow, forgettable characters, save for a man who needs you to rescue his cat, and a girl who's deaf and might have a crush on Miles. And honestly, I think it says a lot that I can only remember the cat's name, and that's only because it's Spider-Man, which is very memorable.
Spider-Man! Oh! Did you have an adventure?
But you have to purposely keep selecting these missions, otherwise you get a call after you complete one to let you know where to go next for the main campaign. So you can either disrupt the overall flow of the main campaign to do side activities, or keep up with the pace of the main story, which largely means rushing forward from chapter to chapter. It's a rather annoying pacing issue. Gameplay-wise, Spider-Man Miles Morales is built on the already solid foundation of 2018 Spider-Man, relying on a straightforward but still compelling timing system for both traversal and combat. Web swinging through the air and catapulting off of rooftops is effortless to pick up, and combat and stealth sections aren't that much harder.
Take him out! Got my eye on you! This ain't gonna end well for you!
However, despite how approachable the game is, Spider-Man Miles Morales still pushes you to get better by rewarding you for pulling off more advanced timing on the tempo of Miles' web swinging and combat abilities. Do you need to use these harder to time abilities to beat the game? No. But getting the timing down produces a flow-like rhythm to both traversal and combat, allowing them to more seamlessly mold together in an ever more satisfying way over time. Though Miles controls pretty much exactly like Peter did in 2018 Spider-Man, he has a few unique superpowers, Venom Strikes and Camouflage. Miles' Venom Strikes offer him area of effect attacks, stunning and damaging groups of enemies. Meanwhile, his Camouflage allows him to fairly easily reset a stealth encounter or perform silent takedowns that Peter couldn't do in the first game. But even without these abilities, Miles is as powerful as his mentor. I'd sometimes go entire fights without using any of the Venom attacks because I forgot that they were there. The same goes for invisibility in some of the stealth sections. Miles' unique powers are his own, but they simply fit into Peter's already established moveset. So despite being a new Spider-Man, Miles doesn't actually play like a new Spider-Man, which feels like a missed opportunity to use the gameplay to reinforce that Miles brings his own creative spin to his mentor's abilities. There are moments where using Miles' unique powers would be beneficial, but they're rare, relegating the Venom Strikes and Camouflage to very specific situations. And since Miles is more than competent without Venom or Camouflage, the introduction of new enemy types that can temporarily disable his Venom attacks or see him when he's invisible don't actually force you to get creative and tackle challenges in new ways. And so the difficulty of Spider-Man Miles Morales remains fairly flat throughout the campaign, only spiking for boss battles. Like I said at the top of this review, Spider-Man Miles Morales feels a lot like a missing chapter to 2018 Spider-Man. The gameplay is so similar, and the environment is largely the same. It's in the characters, especially Genki and the Tinkerer, and the story that it tells that the game manages to break free of what's been done already to deliver something that you'll want to see all the way through. Spider-Man Miles Morales wastes little time jumping you to Miles' story, and rarely lets up on the brakes, packing the young wallcrawler's first solo outing with more superpowers and radio chatter than the game needs. And yet, despite its frantic pace, Spider-Man Miles Morales is compelling from a narrative standpoint, with a nuanced villain that helps highlight why Miles is so special, his culture. It's Miles' unique differences and earnest attempts at figuring out how to protect his community that make him into such a wonderful hero, not the mask he wears and the superpowers he wields.